This is a conversation with Liesel Teversham about the CliftonStrengths.
Yeah, what I would love to do today is to really get this strengths perspective. So first of getting the basics, but also getting the getting kind of the larger implications of what that means for me as an individual or for you as an individual, to have this idea of, okay, so humans have strengths and the strengths may be different. You have different strengths than me. And what does that then mean for our life? And what does that mean also for working together for a society at large? Because I find this idea that we're all really different and that we may have completely different strengths fascinating, and to just explore what does that mean? Because I'm not sure I fully understand the perspective of the strengths yet, but I think it actually has quite large implications if we look through that lens. So that would be my hope for today, to just explore that with you. So thank you for talking to me about that.
Oh, you're welcome. It's an area that I really enjoy talking about. So I may not be able to give the overview in no, let's not say it that way. But if there's questions along the way with whatever I say, please ask me so that we can give this the full perspective, because there may be bits, because I think it's so normal to know it, because it's all in my head, I may forget to say it. So just make sure to ask questions.
I'm very happy to do that. I will be just asking questions. I mean, I find that that's also a really interesting thing. I know that as the curse of knowledge is, once we know something, we think everybody does, until we realize they don't. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
So maybe as a first question, I would really love to know, like, what are strengths in this perspective that you take? What are strengths?
So strengths, there's a difference between talents and strengths. Okay, and I'm not talking talents like drawing or musical talent. Talents in the Gallup University has been doing research in this for 40 years or so. And this comes from Gallup University's perspective. So a talent is a pattern of thinking, feeling, and behaving that can be productively applied. When we manage...
So wait, let's just stop there. So a talent is a pattern of thinking, feeling, or behaving?
Yes.
That can be productively applied.
Yes.
What does that mean? What does productively applied mean, most of all?
So productively applied means you can do something with it that can be helpful and productive in your own life and in other people's lives. So we'll explore a little bit more about this as we go along, because it may be easier to understand once we've explored the next little bits. That is the Gallup definition. A talent is a pattern, so it's brain neural networks that have formed over using it over and over and over and over. So we think in certain ways, we feel in certain ways, and we behave in certain ways. And it's a talent if we can productively apply it, but it's not a strength yet. It can become a strength when we manage those patterns well, and we add skills, abilities, knowledge, all of that. We add it to the talent. Then it can become a strength, and it becomes something that we, this is all sounding very theoretical, so it may become much easier if we actually give examples.
Yeah, and I'm happy to go there. I'm just trying to really get this. So a talent is basically something you might be born with, or you might have developed in early childhood or whatever. Like, it sounds like the Gallup approach is quite whatever it is, you have that talent. And then on their website, they call it investing in that talent. Like you invest into that talent and you develop, you gain the cognitive concepts you need, you gain the skills you need, you practice. And it's when that talent and the work come together. So it's not the work by itself, it's not the talent by itself, it's where they come together.
Precisely, then it can turn into a strength. Yes, exactly. It can, when a talent is well managed, it becomes a strength. And it's when the two come together, exactly like you've said. So we've got these natural propensities. Some of it is nature, some of it is nurture. We do have genes that we get from our parents and grandparents. So some of it is there, and some of it we also grow up in the environments where those genes are. So we nurture them as well. So they grow stronger. But we can't necessarily yet do something productive with it. And that's where we need to invest in them and realize, okay, I've got a talent for empathy. Empathy comes naturally for me. How am I going to make the most of this and turn it into a strength? So for that, I sometimes need skills. I need to learn something and practice it to become a master of that, so that it truly turns into a strength. There's actually, so many thoughts flooding into my brain about it. And one of the thoughts that I want to add is, so that's the Gallup terminology. My strengths mentor that I learned from explains a strength this way. A strength is a certain kind of an energy that comes out of you. And at the same time, it is a certain kind of need. So each strength, and in Gallup terms, we talk 34 specific strengths. Each strength has an energy that it brings with it. When I walk into the room with my empathy, immediately the emotional intelligence in the room goes up. Everybody is more aware of emotion. So it brings the energy of emotion into a room. And each talent also, or each strength also has their own needs. So my empathy talent, in order to be able to express itself, it needs an environment where that is allowed or safe to do so, and there's other things as well. So an energy or a talent or a strength can also be described as an energy and a need.
And then I get the energy. I mean, I find that interesting if we look at that from this energetic, potentially there's a grid of energy, whatever perspective, but also this need. And it sounds like in order for me to fully bring my strength, the environment needs to provide something, but also I need to provide something to that strength. Are both of those true?
They are both true. You're very, very perceptive. They are both true. For instance, I think of a maximizer. There's a talent called maximizer. A maximizer needs other people to maximize. He wants to maximize other people, take them from good to great. And at the same time, he needs to be maximized as well. So if he's not working in an environment where there are people or businesses or opportunities that he can maximize, that's the environment he needs to be in. His talent is going to be frustrated. He'll go into the frustration side of, I can't bring it out. So he needs the environment to provide those opportunities. And he also has a personal, almost responsibility to say, this is what I need. And I need to be maximized. So, create opportunities for himself to be maximized.
So, and this again sounds like each strength has a light side to it, kind of the strength it can potentially bring, but it also has kind of a shadow to it, that if it's not used, it actually can produce specific negative results. In the sense of if I'm not in an environment where I can maximize myself or others, I actually get frustrated in a way that somebody who doesn't have that strength or who's not interested in that doesn't actually get frustrated.
Exactly. And there's two kind of places that the shadow side, I think, can play out. The one is it doesn't have a healthy channel for it to go into. So it, then it goes into like frustrations and each strength has different patterns of thinking, feeling, and behaving that it will go into. And then the other bit is, let me just think, because I had it so sharply a moment ago. Oh yes, we can either underuse it, that's the one shadow part, or we can overuse it. And that's almost like a part that hijacks us, that jumps into the driver's seat all of the time. And it doesn't give the other strengths a chance to do their own work. And it just and it can make our lives very unpleasant. And then it becomes a detriment. And that is a mismanaged strength can become a detriment. So we can either mismanage it by overusing, it jumps in the driver's seat all the time, or we can mismanage it actually by underusing, by not giving it a healthy channel. And that can, of course, happen when we're not even aware we have the strength.
So maybe before we get a little bit more concrete, I as a person really enjoy big picture and then getting into the details. So that's probably why I'm asking these questions. But it sounds like in one way what this approach is asking for is basically saying know yourself, know what your strengths are. And then there is this aspect of, and then knowing that, manage your life, yourself, in a way where you actually use your strengths, so that you don't overuse one and underuse another one, but you actually use what you have available to you.
Yes, that's beautifully put. Exactly. None of the development or the really channeling them usefully can happen if we don't even know them, or that they exist, or how powerfully they can work for us. So it all starts with awareness and then development.
And can you maybe give 2 examples of, or 2 or 3 or something like that, of strengths, so we can maybe get a taste for what this Gallup approach would consider a strength?
Yeah, I'll let my mind go to which ones might be useful. I also want to say 2 things about strengths before I get there, just for another bigger picture.
Of course, yeah.
Type of thing is, the one is it's rooted in positive psychology. The whole strengths movement is rooted in positive psychology, and it asks what's right with us, not what's wrong with us. So that's the whole approach, is we're going to look at the patterns that are right with us and strengthen them even more by developing them. So now let's get to an example. Intellection, right? That's a strength. That's in the thinking domain. So there are 4 different domains of strengths. There's executing, there's influencing, there's relational, and then there's thinking. And intellection is a talent theme in the thinking domain. So intellection is the talent that can think very deeply, multiple layers from different angles, in so many different shapes and forms, and for hours and hours busy thinking through things in such depth. And it brings incredible wisdom. By the time somebody has used their intellection talent to think things through very carefully, when they eventually speak or write or do something with all that thinking, there will be huge wisdom that comes out of that. Now, when we are not aware that it's a strength, people could see it as, oh, you're too up in your head. We sometimes get blamed or labeled for our strengths, and people make it into a weakness or a shameful thing, something to be labeled, like you're too up in your head. You're thinking, why are you so quiet? I've sat in how many courses where the person is busy explaining something and I have to run it through my mind, and in my mind I'm busy connecting it to 10 other things that I've already learned. It's like busy connecting the dots and, you know, going wild. Lots is happening here in my mind. But a person who is more verbal expressor will think that I'm too quiet. Like they will ask me, why are you so quiet? Well, there's 10,000 things happening up in my brain. So for a person with high intellection, thinking is almost as active as doing is for somebody else. So it's a very, very active brain, thinking through things in multiple layers, and out comes wisdom and well thought through ideas. So that's one example in the thinking theme.
Can I just ask one question? So I can fully get why you can look at that as a strength and how that produces certain maybe distilled insights that you cannot get to without thinking it through. Now, I would imagine that can be a strength in the thinking field. It could at the same time be a massive weakness if I try to use that in the relational field. Like if I'm in a relationship and somebody asks me a question, I'm like, I'll get back to you in 5 days. Yes, I would like pudding. Like that could be a real difficulty.
Yes, and I agree with you. It could produce difficulties, and I wouldn't call it a weakness. It's still a strength. It's not a well-managed strength then.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Right. So just the terminology just helps us to see, okay, what am I doing with this strength? We can we can still, you know, if it's another intellectual person, they will absolutely understand that.
They'll be like,
right. Can you
okay,
make it
maybe
6 days?
we will maybe have pudding in 5 days. I get it.
Exactly.
And I have a second question, so let's make it 7 days. Chocolate or vanilla if you want pudding? Yeah.
Exactly. So it depends who you talk to, how frustrating it would be for them. And still the key is to manage these strengths well. Otherwise, it can become a detriment. Exactly. So it can lead to relational detriments, vocational detriments, things that just don't work well. So the minute we realize there's something dysfunctional, something not working, we can look to our strengths to say, how can I manage them better?
And this goes back to the positive psychology lens of let's see what is working and how we can improve on that. I imagine there can also be the other side of sometimes it's not just a mismanaged strength, but actually maybe a difficult pattern we've developed in the past. But this would be the strengths perspective, would be how to deal with this situation from our strengths.
From our strengths, exactly.
Okay. Yeah.
And sometimes what happens is we can use, because all of us have, you know, there's a list of 34 strengths, and around about the top 10 to 12 are our strong patterns, the patterns, the strengths that make us feel strong. That's the definition. The other definition is it makes us feel strong when we use them. So if we have one of them as intellection and it wants to think, a strength never actually operates in isolation. The other 11 are there as well. And if we realize intellection wants to think for 5 days, we can ask one of the other talents, like, hang on, you know, this is not going to work. Which of my other talents can I use to help me make this more working for everybody? Or
So it's basically a model of a multiplicity. We have multiple parts and they can actually be active at the same time.
exactly. Yes. It's a problem when one wants to hijack the entire boardroom. Yes. Yes.
Okay, so we had intellection as one example.
Yeah, so let me think of another one. So let's think of an executing talent example. I'll use the one of discipline, comes to mind. So discipline, it sounds like self-discipline. It's not. They just had to choose words that encompass a whole lot of, about, 10 to 12 maybe little themes in each of these talents. So discipline is the talent of structure, order, and routine. Those are things that are important to this talent. And that comes naturally to this talent. So discipline looks at its diary and it says, right, I need a plan for my day. And they go in and they plan their day like every minute can be planned. That's the way they love and enjoy it. So like this hour I'm going to do this, then I'm going to do this, then I'm going to do this. Or a project, I need to do this, then that, then that, then that. Structure, order. You know, every Tuesday I want to do the same thing, then I feel like I'm strong.
So through this definition of strength, they have a talent in that, they have trained that, and it makes them feel strong when they do that.
Yes, they may not necessarily have trained in that, but they've done it over and over. So they may not have skills, but they've trained by practicing it over and over.
Yeah,
so,
and I didn't mean trained in the, I took a training for that, but
right.
I've done it over and over.
Exactly, yes. As I think around 3 years of age, starts, up to that point, babies and young children get so many new neural networks, and then at some point there's too many, and the brain has to start pruning, and certain neural networks start falling away, and the ones that are left are our strengths and our talents. That's what comes easy to us, and it makes us feel like, yes, I'm me, like I these are the things that are easy and creative for me. So discipline has done that perhaps over and over and over, put structure into whatever they are busy doing. It can be following a recipe exactly. I have a friend who's a chef, and the kind of plans he puts into place where he goes and cooks for people are like to the minute. He plans when the turkey must go into the oven, when he needs to start making the sauce, when he needs to do this thing. It's planned to the minute, perfection, planned, details. So they do this easily and without even thinking about it, and they cannot understand that it's hard for other people to be so planned and structured and ordered in their days or in their cupboards, or clothing will be like neat and tidy and then maybe arranged by colors or by the style or something like that. As long as they have that structure, it works for them. So of course that can also have its own detriments, because not everybody can be like that. So if they teach that method and they can't understand that people can't follow it, it's it can be hard for the students, or it can just like take over and be totally inflexible. Like they feel very uncomfortable if something suddenly comes and upsets their routine. It's very, very hard for them to deal with that, and it's like it pushes them over and they battle to stand upright again from that kind of energetic influence. So Lucas, is there anything else that you were wondering about this talent, for instance?
No, it makes a lot of sense what you say, especially when you were describing how you use the words they've done it over and over again. And I was just thinking that probably, especially with something like discipline, like they have definitely done that over and over again, because that's what they do. They do things over and over again in a similar fashion. So I just thought that was pretty funny.
It's an excellent point.
But in my mind, I was just comparing discipline, for instance, with intellection, and how if I'm truly trying to think something through, I can't plan that. I cannot say, okay, I have 20 minutes now to think about the positive things, and then I have 20 minutes to think about the negative things. I mean, that can work to some degree, and it can be helpful, but that's not the same process of thinking. Whereas if I'm like, oh, I'm just going to sit here until I've figured out how to do this thing with my business, I'll probably never get started with actually doing anything. So they just function completely differently, and they have very different roles in life and in our day-to-day life.
Precisely. Very different roles. And we can't expect the one So there's no cookie cutters where we can say like this one is going to fit into the same kind of slot as that one. We just have to slot it into different places. They all have very different ways of functioning. They bring different benefits to the table. Yes, and problems come in when we try and expect that one to be the same as this one in some way. They're all so unique. Yes.
And the second point you talked about is that this can kind of create translation issues. If I try to maybe having strong discipline and I try to give you advice or give you a solution to a problem you're facing, but you have very low discipline and you work differently, that can create irritation because my methods will not work for you. And I may not even be able to understand why not. And I will just say that you're weak-willed or whatever, rather than understanding that you're actually built differently than me.
Precisely. Yes, so fascinating how we label other people. There's each of the strengths have kind of their own lens with which they view life, and almost in a way judge others who can't see it that way. For instance, the lens of, there's another talent called achiever, is that people who can't work as hard as I can are lazy. Discipline might think, yes, somebody is just being, maybe they think they're lazy as well, like, or they're weak-willed, or they just don't have what it takes, or something like that. That, like, each one of the talents has got its own lens through which it views other people or the world. It's like, this is my disciplined view of the world. It expects, there's one of the, what do you call it, like a principle we work with in strengths that says we like the fish in the water with our own strengths. We know the water so well that we don't realize it's there anymore. So our strengths feel so normal to us that we assume everybody else has it as well and understand it the way that I understand life. The way that I can do life is how everybody else should be able to do it, because it feels normal in my body for all these 50 years to have operated this way. So why can't everybody else do it? And it talks exactly about what you said a minute ago, is the sort of blaming somebody else or trying to give them advice from my strengths, and it may not land for them at all because they have it in their bottom 5 to 8. What we have in our bottom 5 to 8 is on what we call our non-patterns. They are not patterns for us, and it's very hard to try and function in those ways. We can, and it takes a lot of effort and energy, and it's not sustainable.
So basically, in the Gallup way, we have our strengths, we have our non-patterns, and in between that we have like semi-patterns, or how do you call the middle?
Yes, we call them well-functioning.
Well-functioning.
Functioning, yes. We can choose them. They're not the default, but they're still functional. We can choose them. We can say, okay, today I need this one. Let me just call on it.
And the non-patterns are basically, maybe in the metaphor of pruning, they were the stuff that just got pruned. Like, yes. I didn't need that in my first 3 years, so my brain was like, fuck this shit, get rid of that. And now it's just not there.
It's not there, or it's there in a minimal amount. And here's the problem with trying to improve our weaknesses. It takes a very long time, because the strengths have been practiced, like you said, trained earlier, 10 million times, 50 million times easily. It's been practiced that well. It's so easy for us. The non-patterns, maybe there's still thin little neural networks there, but to get it to the same strength as the other ones are going to take effort and energy and repetition, conscious repetition, until it becomes unconscious. And it's very, very, very hard work. The brain is a energy saving machine. It wants to do as little as possible with too much energy. So it will keep defaulting to the strong ones. So it takes conscious effort to improve what's right down at the bottom. So it's what Gallup's saying, you know what, don't do that. Don't waste your energy there. Keep on improving what's here. You know, focus on them. Manage your bottom strengths. And there's 2 ways to manage them.
I want to get to them in a second. I just want to kind of make sure that I understood that part, because so it sounds like you can improve your non-patterns. You can build them into patterns. It's just a lot of effort.
Yeah. And I'd say, they probably say, not in my words here, but they say, like, it's not recommended. You're going to spend your whole life trying to improve those bottom things, where you could have had a life of joy, energy, inspiration, motivation, loving it, by building on what's already right with you. Instead of saying, let me try and bring these bottom ones up. I don't know that it's actually really possible to bring them up to the same level. You're going to have enough lifetimes.
Yeah, no, I wasn't meaning that you would get them to a strength. I was just meaning you would kind of, you are able to improve on them.
You can improve on them, yes.
And maybe this even goes into what it means to manage a non-pattern. I'm curious, what are the 2 ways of managing them?
Yeah. So the 2 ways are, we manage around them. In other words, if there's a task or a project or a business thing or whatever that requires one of our bottom strengths, we can manage around it by asking some of our top strengths to come in and help. So say discipline is very low for me, and I need to structure and order my day, I can ask my achiever that's very high, help me, because achiever loves ticking boxes and says, yes, I've done it. So I can ask achiever, well, achiever, just help me to get this done I want to tick these boxes by the end of the day. So help me in that way. So we can manage around the bottom ones by using our top ones. And the other way to do it is to get help from somebody who's high in that strength. That's why I truly believe we need each other. We are not supposed to be, in the strengths view of the world, we're not supposed to be balanced or equally good in everything that we try.
So when I listen to that, it seems like you have certain challenges in your life. In your case, you're creating your own business, so you just have certain shit that needs to get done. And maybe the discipline pattern or the discipline strength would be the natural strength to do that, but that's not very developed. So you kind of build your own way of dealing with these situations. And if you notice that doesn't work, what then?
There may be some other strengths that you can call on. You know, it's like, okay, I've tried Achiever now. Okay, that didn't work so well. So which other one can I call on? Or a combination of 2 of them that can help me get things done. So what then is, then you ask somebody who's high in that strength, either to come into your space with a focus mate session, for instance, or just working together like a little collaboration. Like, you know, I know somebody in my mastermind group has a talent high in this thing and I just can't get it done. So can I ask that person for an hour of their time just to help me with this thing, and I give an hour of my time for something that they're struggling with. Something like that.
And this would go back to the idea of it being an energy, is that when I'm actually in the space with somebody that can support me to actually do that thing.
Yeah, exactly. The energy of that thing comes into the room when I'm in touch with this person. It just works. I've seen it over and over.
Okay. So a few minutes ago, you had this comparison of, okay, so you can work on your non-patterns, and have a horrible life. you didn't use those words, but that was kind of implied there. Or you could work with your strengths and actually have a good life. So can you describe that version of, if you stick to your strengths, you'll have a good life? Can you describe what that would mean through this Gallup lens?
Yeah, that's such a great point, and a question is, of course, there's also, because you're unique individuals, there's various versions of this. The ideal world is that when we use our strengths, we are at our most creative, productive, effective. We love how we do things and what we do. We feel strong. We feel, I want to do this again. We feel excited about our life and how our days went. It's like, yes, this was good. Yes, I'm tired at the end of the day, and tomorrow I want to do it again. We feel fulfilled. I'm in the right place at the right time. We feel energized. We don't need a holiday from this life, although it's still good to take rest and recharge times, of course, for anybody, but it doesn't feel like I have to escape my life. I'm building a life that I thoroughly enjoy. Of course, in any life, there's still going to be the times that we just have to get shit done. And the predominance of time, we're going to feel this way. If I'm using my strengths, and it's a kind of, it's almost like strengths tell us how we're going to do things, not what we should do. So it doesn't necessarily give us an indication of what career I should follow, although it can help us to decide. But it's more like strengths tell us how we're going to do everything. So there can be managers, excellent managers of teams who have lots of thinking talents, or lots of relational talents, or lots of influencing talents. And they will each do the job differently, but they can be an excellent manager because they do it from their strengths. And they manage to the other people's strengths. So that's an important thing about working with teams as well. So I know I have a solo business, but if I know my client's strengths, I know how to run a session to make it easier for them to bring what they need to bring.
So, and this seems to be a very core idea, this idea of it tells me how to do things, not what to do. So I mean, I imagine if I have absolutely no strengths in the relational, I may not be the best therapist if there's absolutely nothing there. But maybe that's a black and white example. But so basically what you would suggest is knowing my strengths, creating a life and creating a way in which whatever my job is, whatever my situations are, creating it in such a way that I can apply my strengths.
Yes.
Can you give a concrete example for that? I'm not sure I fully get that one yet.
Yeah. So just going back to your question about, say I've got 0 relational strengths, and reality is I'm possibly not going to be drawn to be a therapist. So it possibly won't even be in the mix of possibilities for me. So let me think of a concrete example. I have in my top, I think my top 13 strengths are my full complement of strong strengths, if I can call it that way, right? There are I think there are two thinking strengths in there, and then 3 executing strengths, and the rest of them are relational. So I'm working whenever, throughout my entire life, it's always worked for me that people just come to me with problems, and I never knew why. I thought there was a sticker here that said, tell me your problems. I never found that sticker. So when I found strengths, like, oh, finally, I think I'm in the right job. I'm in the right career for what my strengths naturally do. So all my strengths want to be involved with people, thinking about them, and then doing things in a certain way. So that's one example I can think of. Somebody who's a programmer, for instance, it might be that they were drawn to that career because they have very high analytical strengths. Strategic thinking is another strength. If you're a programmer and you don't have those strengths high, it may feel like a bit of a struggle. It may just not be as easy for you to write the programs that come really easily to some other people. It's just a little bit harder. It takes you a little bit longer. You can't think of the kind of complex algorithms and formulas and things that other people find really, really easy. That was an example in my own life. My analytical strength is in my well-functioning talents, but I was a computer programmer for 8 years. I did not like maths at school, but I've got some form of logical thinking at least, and I was a programmer, and I just didn't find it as easy as other people, and I still loved it because my learner strength loved learning new things. I loved learning, programming, interesting new area, new programming language, lovely, I love it. And the analytical part, who had to do the formulas and all of that, it's like, this is hard. And so that's one example. I still did it, I loved it, until my learner got bored. Like, okay, I know this now. What's next? So did give some examples that made it a little clearer.
Yeah, so from what you described, it seems like you have no strengths in the influence department.
That is correct.
Okay.
They're all in the bottom for me.
Uh-huh. So how do you deal with being a solopreneur? How do you deal with things like selling, making offers? Because that would sound to me like a more influence area. So how do you deal with that?
With my relational strengths, I build relationships. That's the only thing I need to do, and it really, really works for me. I don't have to convince anybody. When I've built a relationship with that person and they've learned to trust me, because I truly just have a desire to be of use to people, to help, to make their lives easier, to make things a little bit calmer where they were tumultuous. I don't need to convince anybody. I don't need to influence them at all. The relational strengths are very strong for me, so that comes easily to me.
You've basically found a way to sell without selling, but rather of building a relationship and then being like, eh.
That's it. That's it. And it just, my husband keeps saying to me, because he's more in the sort of technological area, and they had to close big deals with companies and corporates and so on. He said to me, you have such a high close rate. And for me, even using the words closing rate, it's like, yeah, that feels horrible. It doesn't fit into my relational strengths, because that feels too influencing, too pushy, too like I convinced somebody to do something. I don't have to convince anybody.
And you don't want to convince anybody.
No, I don't want to. So my relational strengths can do that same job well, because I believe in what I do. That's another strength that's there in my top strengths. I believe in what I do. I truly care about the person, and they can feel that. And then it's not a sale. It's just, yes, they want to work with me.
I think for me, that's a really good example of this, because, number one, it's a question of mindset. Like, how do we look at sales, or whatever we want to call it in the end? But it's also a question of how do I approach that challenge? Because it is there and it won't go away. But how do I approach that? And do I approach it as a relationship, or do I approach it as a sale or a close?
Yes, yes, yes. The words even have a different feeling to them, right? In the
Yeah.
one, it's people first, and the other one, it's maybe profit first, or things first, or an outcome first. You know, my bottom line, or numbers, or something. So, exactly. And for people with high relational strengths, teaching them the other way won't sit right in their energy system. So it really matters also who we learn from. If I try and learn from somebody who's got very high influencing talents and they do things a certain way and for them it works. They teach it that way because it works for them in their energy system. But in my energy system, it's going to grate. I'm going to just feel the discomfort of that. I cannot use the words they use. I can't use the methods they use. I've tried. But finding a way that fits into our values, and because our values have a lot to do with our strengths, just makes all the difference to how we approach things.
Can you give me one example for an influence strength?
Yes, communication. It's called communication, and it is the talent of verbal communication, verbal expression. So it's almost the opposite of intellection. That was high thinking, thinking, and it doesn't want to express. Verbal expression, communication talent is all about whatever they think, they almost can't think without saying it. So they want to express verbally, and they can do that extremely well. They're usually incredibly skilled storytellers. When a person with high communication speaks, everybody's like, wow, like they use ways of saying things that just make sense. They find the perfect words to express it in ways that other people it can land for them. It just maybe like beautiful language. So let me think what else about communication comes to mind. It's just they can help other people find words for things. Talking comes naturally and easily to them, and they are usually the people who says to high intellection, why are you so quiet? They want to hear what we are thinking. They truly want to hear what we are thinking, and they want to say what they are thinking. That's their method almost of thinking, is when it is verbally expressed. So that is an influencing talent. And why does it influence people? Because of course, you know, it can be used like on stage. You know, there's various ways, like teaching courses. I have a friend she teaches courses, and she feels so energized by the end of every day. I've got low communication. It's in my bottom 5. It's difficult for me. I sometimes stumble over my words. It's not easy for me to talk and talk and talk. And here I am talking and talking, but
But then again, you're being asked questions. I imagine that's a difference if you answer a question rather than speak what you think should be important.
Exactly. And that's a great distinction, Lucas. I think a person with high communication will be able to do that all day. They never without something to say. Yes. And so the detriment of that is they can take over with too much verbal speaking and not give anybody else a chance. There's always the light and the shadow side. So that's one example of influencing. Another one is called command, and it's the person who takes charge when there's a difficult, chaotic situation that needs somebody to take charge. They come, they've got this amazing presence about them. Everybody they feel like an authority. You just feel a big presence when they're in the room. It can be a little intimidating for people with that talent on the opposite side of the spectrum, but people listen when they talk and they take charge and they make decisions They can be confrontational. They talk to things directly. They want to be confronted as well. They want the direct, honest truth. Let's just get this done. And they can flip from conflict or confrontation to calmness in minutes, because it's not an emotional thing for them. That's the energy they bring. So taking charge, being in control, making decisions, easy for them, natural. That's an influence on them.
The next question I have would lead us, I think, a little bit away from just the pure strengths perspective. But I'm curious, do you have anything you want to add, maybe as a roundup to what we've already talked about? Because I think we've covered quite a lot of ground in about 55 minutes now.
Yeah, a lot of ground. Nothing comes to mind that wants to pop out right now. And I'm sure there's so many other ways of describing the things that I've talked about. So this is not the alpha and omega. It's not the be all and end all. It's not the whole story. We're picking at different pieces of it. So if we can
in the way it sounds to me is very clearly like it's a positive psychology perspective on this challenge, and or on this kind of territory, and giving a map of, oh, you have these strengths and these are not your strengths, and let's deal with what you have. Like, that's very much a positive psychology approach.
Exactly.
And I'm really curious about that, because I know you also do EFT. So at least the way I know EFT, it's about you have certain challenges in your life, and actually through tapping you reduce these challenges. So I would be really curious, how does the strength work and the work on, let's say, depending on what language people use, blockages or maybe like negative patterns or trauma or whatever, how does that relate in your experience?
Yeah, that is just a brilliant question. And so few people ask me, because the people I know are either in the strengths camp or they in the EFT camp. And so I'm sitting in the middle, where one of my strengths is called harmony, where I can create win-win situations. And so this is what I find myself having to do between these two very opposing, almost opposing places, right? Because you're right, I started my EFT journey and all I thought about was how to solve problems, how to remove blocks, how to get past obstacles, how to reduce emotional charge. And then I found strengths, like, oh my word, here's a completely different view that I've never thought about. How do I marry the two? It like rocked my brain, and I was like, you know, I fell off my perch for a while. Like, how am I going to make sense of this? Which one will I do now? I don't know. And so I'm still integrating 5 years later. What I found is, and this will come out in bits and pieces because I don't have this formulated well in my brain up to now, is that we talked about the shadow aspects of some of the strengths. They can hijack us sometimes. They can make it difficult for us because they take over and they don't give the other strengths a chance. There can be a wound in that strength. And that comes from childhood. And that's the stuff that we can work with EFT.
Can you give me an example for a wound in a strength?
Yes. Let's say the wound is like, it takes over, or it's mismanaged. In other words, the places where this strength is mismanaged, that causes me difficulties in my life. For instance, I'll just, like, let's make it real, the talent of analytical. It needs facts and data and proof, and it asks a lot of why questions, like, why is it like that? Why do you say that? How do you know that? It can go into analysis paralysis, though. And sometimes it gets stuck in that and it can't get out of it. And we can use EFT to help get past the fear. So if I'm thinking and thinking and thinking, it's possibly because I'm trying to keep myself safe. Because if I don't decide the right thing, you know, something unsafe is going to happen. So if we look at where did unsafe things happen for you, and, you know, who was involved there, and we work through that with EFT, analytical can do its strength job and not get stuck here in the analysis paralysis.
So basically that would be a perspective of sometimes what is actually a strength for me is overdoing it. And through that overdoing, it's actually creating problems, and I can kind of free it.
Yes, yes, absolutely. I can free it so that it can keep focusing on what it can really bring and the amazing things that it can do, and not get stuck in that either overdoing or underdoing place. Another example is my own empathy. It can, because it's got empathy, it's got a big heart, it feels for people. People can bring anything into my space and I can sit with it. And if I'm not careful, it turns into a bleeding heart. Like I was like that in my younger years, like everything hurts me because I can feel that person's pain, or it's like, I don't know what to do about this because I don't have high strategic thinking. Like, how can this person get out of this? Like, I just feel the empathy for them and I know what they're going through emotionally, but it can take my life over if I keep, because there's so many things that are difficult in the world, right? So if I keep feeling the empathy without realizing how detrimental it is for me to sit in that all day long, it, you know, like I can like be stuck and paralyzed in that. It's like the world is too harsh for me. I don't think I could deal with this. You know, I'll just sit in my room and not read the news and not deal with life because it's too hard for me. So I had to use tapping for my own things, and I work with many people with that who find, because they have high empathy as well, who find it really, really hard to face the difficulties of the world because we have empathy for it.
Maybe asking the same question the other way around, at least from the examples you've given. Let's assume we're tapping on a non-pattern, and we find out there's actually like old pain and a wound around that non-pattern, and we resolve that. Will that suddenly turn it into a like a functional pattern or not? Or what's your experience with that?
I wish I had 10,000 hours experience in exactly this, because I'd probably be able to give you a more definitive answer. At the moment, I can't. I don't know. I can't give you a yes or a no. I have not seen that happen in the experience that I have. I have seen quite often how a person has, say, high in a certain strength, and through our talking, they discover that something that they have in their bottom strength, a non-pattern, was high for their parent. So their parent was trying to raise them to be like that. Be responsible, be responsible, be responsible. Finish what you start. You know, you have to, you can't stop what you do. You said you're going to do this, do it. So that was high for their parent, but it's in their bottom strengths. So we have to clear out some of that energy, but it doesn't necessarily make that pattern jump very high. It still hasn't been practiced 50 million times.
So, but just from me thinking about it as I listen to you, what could be is that the charge around it being in the bottom 5 can drop, and then we can actually manage it better. But in your experience, it doesn't like suddenly get better.
It doesn't jump, but the charge can disappear or at least be less, so that we can manage around it. Because here's another interesting thing about the bottom strengths, the non-patterns. We resist those in ourselves and in others. It's not only that it's difficult for us, we resist them. So if we meet a person with that strength high that we have in our non-patterns, we can feel it and we resist their energy. So sometimes we may meet a person and we go like, I don't like them and I don't even know why. They've got high, but I've got low. So if we clear out some of the energy around that, it could just be easier for us to be around those people in the first place.
Hmm. Yeah, and I can also see how these worlds are slightly difficult to marry. Like how because if I have this positive psychology view on things, it can be tricky to look at maybe some of the things I'm experiencing are not just because I'm not in my strength, but they're all pain.
Yes.
And yeah.
Yes, yes. I would say it's easier for me now than it was, say, when I just found out about strengths, or maybe for the first year or so. Like I had difficulty, like, which view must I look at now? Now it feels like I can hear when a client maybe just starts, and we just start with EFT first because they come because of a problem. I'm not going to put strengths right in there from the start. So I listen to them for a few sessions, and I'll start hearing the patterns talking, right? And I hear how they blame themselves for that thing, or maybe other people have shamed them for it, called them labels, negative labels for something. And I can hear, like, this actually sounds like one of their strengths that they don't know about yet. And I'd love to give them that perspective. And then we'll do a strength session, and they'll completely shift their perspective like I did. And they'll be like, what? You're telling me that this thing that I've been feeling bad about for 30 years is actually a good thing. It it shifts their perspective in amazing ways, and I find it then an incredibly powerful combination, because I can keep reminding them through the sessions, like, can you hear your harmony? Or can you hear your restorative? Remember, it's this strength. So how can we make the most of that strength? So I keep bringing both of the things in. Because I think because my own talents are more prone to looking at the past and having empathy and looking at a person as an individual and being curious about what made them the way they are. A lot of it goes more into the EFT world, but I am so grateful for this other perspective that I can keep bringing them in, because so many of my clients find EFT hard. It's like, I don't want to go look at the past, why do we have to keep going back there? Or I don't want to look at the negative things. So we keep bringing in this other part as well.
Yeah. So I imagine we could have a whole lot more to talk about with this, also because we literally covered like 5 different strengths today, very briefly. But yeah, what you're sharing just brings me to this question I've had for years, which is this, in my words, it would be, how are we built? With the idea that we as humans are each built very differently. And like, I'm not sure that some system that has 34 strengths will be the end all be all of like, these are the 34 things to look at. I don't know, but I find it interesting to also have this incredibly positive perspective on this is good for this.
Yeah.
And depending on what the strengths are you have developed, you should handle your life differently.
Yeah.
That's pretty straightforward.
Yeah. Or you could handle your life differently. It's my low influencing that doesn't like should.
I mean, if I listen to the strengths thing seriously, I think they say should. Like,
on their
I,
website.
I'm not saying they say it in their words, but basically their message is your life will be better if you do this, which
Yes.
for
Yes.
me is a come on, do it. Come on.
They're also a very successful company financially, so that I guess they've got copywriters and stuff that know what they're doing. But just to give you a little clue, Lucas, just about, and I know we're at the end of our conversation, but about the uniqueness, and this is super important to me for people to understand, is it sounds like 34 is just a few little things, like how can you possibly be unique with 34? But if we look at your top 5, we call them your signature strengths, your top 5. If we look at your top 5 in any order, The chance that anybody else has them is 1 in 280,000. Okay. If we look at your top 5 in the exact same order as what they came out in your assessment, that chance goes down to 1 in 33.4 or 0.9, I forget which one. 1 in 33.9 million. That's how unique just your top 5 makes you. And then we haven't talked about the rest of the 34. So 34 sounds like it's only a few little things, and of course it's not. No system can contain a person. We are too unique for that. And strengths is not everything. My strengths mentor also keeps saying not every single thing can be explained by strengths. But it certainly is a huge help for us to understand ourselves and other people, and bring compassion to we are doing the best we can with what we have, and so are other people.
Maybe that's a really good endpoint. And we just stop here. Thank you very much for this conversation.
Thank you, Lucas.
And I'll click on the stop button. So this is one of those questions I've been pondering. Is this because I look at it a lot through this personal growth, self-development lens, and I think there are many places where if we actually take care of the burdens we're carrying, things really get easier and our life improves. But it's not like if we've let go of all burdens, suddenly we're all the same. Like that's just not the way it is.
Right.
Like which if we look at it purely through this lens of, oh, everything that doesn't work is just your past. No. Like, so then it gets me to the question of, okay, so you are built differently than me. I am built differently than you. Maybe we're actually meant to have really different lives. Maybe you're meant to live a different life than me if you're built differently than me. And I'm not judging that as better or worse. I'm just saying different. And this then brings me to questions of what does that mean, for instance, for me as a coach or therapist, and the advice or the strategies I give people. Because how am I supposed to give you strategies that work for me if you're built totally different? So that's really been one of those things I've been, or I am still struggling with, like this, trying to get a grip on that. And I'm not sure that it's actually a thing that can ever be grasped fully, but yeah, just those questions. I think they're huge.
They are huge, and they are very, very valid questions, because I think everybody comes from their own strengths when they teach or when they coach or we can't help it. That's the way it happens. And then we are the fish in the water, and we assume that whatever works for us must be the right strategy because look, it's working for us. So right strategy. So give it like a cookie cutter to everybody else, and it cannot work that way because everybody is their own unique individual. And then depending on our strength and our strengths, then we judge that person as a this or that. They're just lazy, or they just don't want to implement, or they're hard-headed, or they're stupid, or they're whatever, coming from the lens of our own strengths perspective. Yeah. Every system I've ever learned, every here's how to create a signature system, here's how to get high-ticket clients, whatever it is, all those things that I've paid thousands of bucks for, they all teach it from their perspective and what worked for them, and strategies that fit inside their energy system and their needs.
Which is interesting because one of the things that I've been thinking about for years now is this question of how to teach also based on people create their own solutions. But at the same time, because I know, and this is again the educational research that I come from, like most of the research on things like discovery learning and learning through challenges shows that all of those concepts don't work. They don't work at all. Like all the schools that are based on, oh, the kids will just discover everything naturally. The research is pretty clear. The research says, no, they won't. No chance. So that brings us to another polarity of how can I teach things, but at the same time create enough freedom for people who are built differently to implement it in a way that fits into their life.
Right.
And I find that's a really fucking difficult challenge to be in. And it's one that I don't have a good solution for.
That is a fascinating question. And I hope somewhere somebody in the world is busy doing research on that.
Somebody's like,
Yes, PhD.
but that's been I have had a few of those in my life, of these moments of shit. Like one of them is realizing that because so much of the way it's kind of thought, at least in Germany and in the German educational sciences, of like, oh, discovery learning and just giving the kids freedom and all of that. And the research is just like, no, don't do it. Like it doesn't work.
Wow.
Like, especially when we learn something new, we need a lot of structure. And that's true for everybody. Like that's true for everybody.
Yes.
So
yeah. So these different parts, because you do need structure, and then there's the exploration. But first, you need a few, at least principles or
and you need
information.
to implement them and use them and practice them, so that then you can create your own.
Yes, that's right. Yes.
But it's a bitch, I would say.
It is a bitch. Well, here's maybe an example that just came to me. So I was 6 years old or 8 years old, and I started piano lessons. There is the theory of music. It's a fixed thing, you know. A note looks like this. That's how you draw it. There's no getting away from it. There's, you know, this is how you play this piece of music. There's no getting away from it. And you have to learn within those rules first. And then each person could go and decide how they're going to practice that. I mean, I got up 6 o'clock in the morning and I practiced my scales for an hour. Maybe somebody else did it in 10-minute slots. Maybe, you know, the implementation or how they're going to get to the end result will be different, but there's certain principles or rules or information bits that's just the same. And then you can start.
And now we get to the interesting part, because there is one person who teaches music completely differently than the classical way music is taught, especially the piano. Because he basically says the system we have right now is incredibly complex for no reason. Like the way we read notes and the way we look at even looking at the piano keyboard. So you know the piano. So one of the ways one of the small things he's changed, but he says it changed everything, is rather than teaching his students from the C key, he's teaching them from the D. Because if you teach them from the D, it's symmetrical. And when it's symmetrical, it's so much easier to learn. So why do you start from the C?
Right.
Where you have no symmetry.
Yes.
So he's teaching them from the D key to teach them symmetrically, and he says it's cut his work in half. Just because they don't have to learn, oh, in this direction it works like this, in this direction, it's the same in both directions.
That's fascinating. Gosh, yes, a small change, and the notes are still called the same thing.
Yes.
You still play D major like that, C major like that, but you start learning from a different point. Wow.
So that's, and this is then now we enter a whole different area, but I mean, this goes into the question of how to teach and how to also cater to people's strengths, but also how to find the principles and make those as simple as possible.
Absolutely.
And yeah.
Wow, Thomas.
It's okay, you can just call me Thomas. It works.
A shame. I'm so sorry for the recording. This is Liesel's mistake.
No problem.
Oh,
I'm going to click on stop again.
You never know what's around the next corner.